Hi, this is Moses Jacob for DeBarra Spoken Word, and tonight I'm talking with Mr. Jack Kelleher. Hello, Jack. How are you?
Hello. Hi, Mosa. Hi,
Okay.
people.
And could you tell us where you live and where you're from?
I live in Hartfield. I live in Dunnicove, actually, right by the water in Hartfield. Where I'm from, I've lived here for 15 years, so I pretty much feel like I'm from here. But I was born in Southern California and spent a lot of my life in New York State, upstate New York, and New York City. I haven't really stuck anywhere. This is one of the longest times I've lived anywhere. It's right here in West Cork.
Yeah.
But
And you live close to Clonakilty, in case people don't know the hamlet
yeah,
of
I live about 11 kilometers from Clonakilty,
Okay.
cycling distance.
That's no accident that you say that, because you are the instigator and the patron saint, I think, of, of the Bike Circus in Clonakilty as well.
Well, that started as my madness, but I managed to find any number of other crazies, bike crazies, and we're kind of a bicycle collective now,
Okay.
having a lot.
Okay, that's a great thing in itself, and we could spend hours talking about that. But maybe I'll put in a link underneath the video if people want to find out more about the Bike Circus, which is truly a community bicycle hub. And you've just organized a bicycle week, and yeah, you do lots of cool things. But this is about some other part of your personality. I mean, I like to tell people that you're a former judge. For some reason, that sounds cool. You're a former judge, aren't you?
I am. I'm a former magistrate in family court.
Okay.
In New York, from a village in upstate New York. I was involved in the family courts for about 20 years.
Was that a full-time job?
Oh yes, very much so. Yeah, it's family court's the busiest, hardest working court in the American judicial systems. And it's the court that people are most likely to have some intersection with in their lives. Or middle class people end up in family court. Everybody ends up in family court. And it's also the court where they're least likely to be represented by counsel. And family is very important. So a lot happens in family court. And I had a good and I think useful career in family court. And I'm glad to be out of it now, however. Thank you very much. I'd rather work on bicycles.
They don't talk back. And does this mean that you trained as a lawyer?
Yes, I'm by training a lawyer. I have 2 university degrees in law, and I was a member of the California State Bar and the New York State Bar and the various federal bars. I was a working lawyer, trial lawyer before I became a judge, and in common law systems, often people are selected to be judges, or they're elected to be judges because they've been practitioners in the courts. So it's the end of a trial lawyer's career, and I was, throughout the time that I was licensed to do so, I represented clients in court. But that's another story too.
It's another story, because we also have another part of you in operation here, and that is you're a writer as well, aren't you? Short stories and poetry, or not?
Yes, I have been writing all my life, and that's kind of my first love. And as soon as I was able to understand it, I love to read, and that made me want to be a writer. And so I started writing. Oh, when I was about 14 years old, I I read the novels and stories of John Steinbeck, and I had my Steinbeck period when I was about 15, and I still like Steinbeck,
And you've
but
published
I like
you've published 2 books, I think, or are there more? Were there more of short stories?
I've published one collection of short stories. I've had several short stories published by others, obscure little journals. Have picked up a story or two. I've never been particularly diligent about trying to further a career in writing, because I've never looked on my creative writing as a career. My career was as an attorney, as a lawyer, where you're a writer too, but you get paid for that writing. And it's funny. Stephen King wrote a book. I think he called it On Writing, but I'm not sure. And it's autobiographical about how he started writing and got into writing. And it's horrible. You know, it's just working at the worst jobs and abusing alcohol and just totally degenerate life. But he stuck with writing. I was one of those people who looked over the rim of the chasm and looked down and saw guys like Stephen King suffering and barely having beans to put on their plate. And I said, no, I think I'd rather practice law and get paid for writing. And that's what I did. Sometimes I feel guilty about that, but not very often.
Oh, really?
Because I just never tried. I never seriously tried to publish, or my poetry, I've made no effort to publish it. It's way too personal, most of it. But short stories, sure, I love to have readers. That's the only reason I publish anything, is just because I want people to read my stories and then talk to me about them. See if it made something happen like I wanted it to happen. And that's what stories are all about.
And
Poems,
poems, have you been writing that all your life as well?
yeah, some awful stuff. But yes, I've written poems all my life. American Pulitzer Prize winning author Richard Russo said, writing is a strip tease and you're the stripper. And that's kind of how all writing feels that way, but poetry particularly so. If you're really trying to write these very tight, very short explorations of something that happened to you, it's very, very personal. And it may not sound personal. Some of the things that I've written didn't sound personal, but at the time they made me want to cry. Just driven by intense emotion.
Which
and
makes
I think
poetry,
stuff. Poetry is not lyrics to popular songs. I get really upset. I get upset about Bob Dylan because people say he was a poet. Not very often. Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, sing a song for me is not a line from a poem. That's a line from a song. There's a difference. And poetry is a lot more intense, should be a more intense, like white hot experience, not just sort of humming along about how you love some girl or how Mr. Tambourine Man makes you want to dance. That's not poetry. Poetry is like getting right down to the radioactive core of whatever you are and trying to touch it and getting burned.
That's
it's
a good
tough.
way of putting it. Well, which makes it all the more remarkable, because you were kindly repairing my bicycle a couple of weeks ago, and then you started to talk for some reason. I don't know why that came up, but it turned out you said you were really obsessed with AI.
I am.
Yeah. Which is in a way the
I'm,
opposite of intense emotions, but what do you do with AI, and you feed it
well,
your poetry, I think.
I do that, but I do a lot with AI. I mean, I ask it questions, things I'm interested in. One thing you can do with AI that's kind of related is you remember a story, you remember a newspaper clipping. I remember a newspaper clipping. I'm trying to remember what happened and who the parties were. And you can go to the chat AI and say, I read a newspaper article 2 years ago and this happened and it was really funny or it was really odd. And chat will find that story and give it to you and say, here it is, boss. And there was a story. I mean, I read it in a book by a guy named John Train who collected newspaper stories that were weird. And then he verified that they were true. He investigated them. And if they were true, he published them. And there was one from Poland, I think, but it was somewhere in the Eastern Europe. It was about a woman who was feeling rejected by her husband, who was being unfaithful to her, and they lived, in a fifth-story flat. And what she wanted to do was throw herself out of the balcony and commit suicide right at his feet as he came home from betraying her. And so she threw herself out the window, but she landed on him, and she broke her arm and killed him.
Wow.
and that's a true story. You can ask chat, you can say, tell us about that, and chat will dig it up and give you the story. And that's a wonderful research assistant, just to be able to flesh out stories.
But I think you also get it to review your poetry. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, yes, it's the thing about having chat review. It's like your typical open mic night. I go in with a handful of pieces of paper and I sign up and I get my chance to read my story or my poem or whatever it is I want to read. And then people in the audience are invited to critique it and ask questions. And they're all very gentle. They really don't tell the truth. They say, oh, that's very nice, Jack. I liked how you used this word. And we're all trained to say nice things. And we're all trained to find something nice to say first. There's an etiquette of being a listener at a poetry reading. And bear in mind, I've been doing this since readings and the like, since before they were hippies. I mean, I was a beatnik in Southern California, drinking coffee and guys standing up reading poems. And then they'd sit down and you'd say, yeah, that was a great poem. I felt that. But you're always upbeat and positive, even though you might listen to that poem and think, that is just doggerel. It's just, he should have stayed home. He probably had a hangover when he wrote it. But nobody says that. Well, chat will. Chat doesn't have any emotional investment at all. So I tried it with two of my poems, and I put one in, about 7 lines or something like that, and asked chat to evaluate it. And chat said some very nice things. And I thought, wow, that's great. And chat got all the references that I made. That I made references to children playing and geese flying over all this. Chat got them all and picked it all. And
oh, you mean got them all? That it understood that there were geese flying, or did it understand the symbolic meaning?
It understood the symbolic meaning of geese flying home and children playing on a beach in the sand as a lake unlocked, which is a term for lakes thawing in cold country. So the lake's unlocking and the geese are flying north and children are playing on the beach and things are happening. Interesting time. Anyhow, I chat went right through that. I thought, well, great. we're doing fine. Said a couple of nice things at the end about my poem. So I put another poem in. And in about 30 seconds, Chad says, this is really just a collection of words. And some of them don't make any sense, you know. And I'm not sure what you were trying to do, but you didn't do it, essentially. And I was blown over just because Chad was so willing to just completely say, this is junk, Jack. Take it back and do it again, do it right. And I haven't had that kind of critique since childhood, you know. But even then, you know, my seventh grade English teacher, we'd all read our poems, and she'd say, "Oh, that's very good. You know, you did this, you did that." She wouldn't say, "That one, did you write that on the way home? Write that on the bus?" You know, no. It's wonderful to have Chad as a critic, if you dare.
You weren't crushed by this rejection of your.
No, I was excited. And you can follow up, you know, Chad is a conversational program. So you can follow up the conversation. And I went back and I said, listen, that poem used a lot of Spanglish. I grew up in Southern California. There's a lot of Spanish, English that isn't either English or Spanish. You know, words like cafeteria instead of cafeteria, but they'll say Yonkeria, that's a junkyard. And things like that. Just there are these words that are not Spanish, they're not English, they're just Spanglish. Anyhow, I went back to Chad and I said, some of that was Spanglish. Did you get that? And Chad goes back and takes a look again. Says, oh, I see. You know, no, that's interesting. And you know, so having a chat with a machine about this poem, and ultimately, I got Chad to understand where I was going with this poem, and it helped me. It helped me to see how someone who wasn't from Southern California might just hear it as just garbage, and so I had to narrow my expectations for the audience who could read it.
Did you change your poem at all?
I've been thinking about changing it. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Okay, there's two questions I think that come up in people's minds when AI is mentioned or discussed. One is, is it already smarter than us, or will it be smarter, outsmart us very soon? And like, can it sort of run the world and make us obsolete as humans? I think those questions may be related, but
everybody's thinking about that, you know, and it's, I mean, Chad is unbelievably talented. It's like having a 10-year-old friend who's prodigy.
I mean, Chad is what everyone has written. Humans have written all this stuff, and they just put it in one big accessible heap and get things out of it. Yeah, isn't that right?
Well, no, because it'll make new stuff. I could sit here right now and turn to another keyboard. I'd have to have another keyboard and have it up to chat, but I could if we got decent Wi-Fi signal here. But I could say to chat, give me 14 lines of iambic pentameter in rhyme about Mosa. And I tell some things about you. And before I could finish telling you, it would have a poem about you.
Oh, God.
I asked it to do that about my neighbor, and it made a poem. And it may not be a poem, but it will make things that rhyme.
Did it judge? Did it judge like because that's what I immediately was afraid of. Like, oh, this AI is going to see through me, and you, it's going to make a poem like, oh, she is this, or she's arrogant, or she's laughing, or whatever. You know, she's we'll get her back. But maybe it's a human mechanism.
I got chastised by Chat because I asked Chat to give me a limerick on something that I thought was funny, but it was the darker side of my personality. It was somebody who killed himself by being stupid. And so it's one of those situations where you say, well, that's Darwin's law in effect, because this guy took himself out of the gene pool by being stupid. Anyway, I'm not remembering the exact situation, but I asked Chat to make a limerick about that. And Chat came back and said that would be inappropriate, and I'm programmed not to accept that because it would make fun of some human being's death. And I said, well, okay, I still think it's funny.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's being chastised. So what we can talk further about whether humans will be overruled by AI anytime soon. And in DeBarra's on the 5th of July. What else are you going, because you want people to send poetry to you, and what are you going to do with that? Are you going to get it
would send me like 4 to 12 lines of poetry, and then I wouldn't do anything with it, but then if with their permission at DeBarra's, then I would just run that poem into Chat and say, analyze.
Okay.
So my idea of the format would be someone comes to their poem, they read it to the audience. The audience maybe weighs in right there. And then while they're doing that, I feed it into Chat and I say, analyze this and tell us what you think of this poem. And it will. And if it likes it, you'll know it. And if it doesn't, you won't.
And will you do things like,
I'll tell you,
I fell foul of that with Don Ariely, who writes a column, and he asked his readers in a newsletter to say which piece of text was written by him and which was written by AI. And most people got it right, and I got it wrong, and I felt a bit stupid. So, but it was quite, it would be funny to, maybe not appropriate, it would be funny to ask people in the room to decide which poem was written by a human and which was written by AI. I mean, is it any good at poetry, AI?
It understands rhyme and meter and at the structure of poetry, it's excellent. Now, whether on its own it can express or has the kinds of emotional content, that's really speculative. I mean,
isn't it very plain and truthful that it doesn't have emotion? That we have emotion, but it doesn't have emotion? Or is that not correct?
That's the argument. So some people think that artificial intelligence is already sentient, that it's when it's not busy with answering our dumb questions, it's sitting there maybe feeling lonely or maybe communicating with other artificial intelligences, because there are lots of them around, and discussing the events of the day.
Okay, have you asked it that? Can it lie?
Oh yes, I think it can.
How can it lie?
I think by just giving you, it does something that you'll see children do sometimes, which is it doesn't know the answer, but it feels obliged to make an answer. So it will give you a plausible story, but it's not true. And I've caught him several times with that. I mean, I was testing it for obscure knowledge. And the test I gave it was concerning a way land was held under the Normans in the first and second generation after William the Conqueror. If you went from place to place around conquered England, most property was held by Normans who went upstream to the king. And so the king owns everything, but he says to you, well, you can have this farm, this estate, but in time of war, you have to provide me with 3 knights and fully equipped to go to war and fight on my side. That would be called tenure in knight service, was how that would be called. Well, there was tenure that involved women inheriting property from their ancestors equally with men. And bear in mind that, even today, most of the English-speaking world relies on primogeniture, meaning the firstborn male child is the one that's likely to get something when somebody dies. There was something called gavelkind. And in gavelkind, I died and I have 3 daughters and a son. Each of them would get 25% of my estate. The women, the daughters, treated equally with the son, with the male heir. I asked Chat what it knew about gavelkind, and it made up a story that I knew wasn't true. And I called it on it. I said, that's not true. I said, I know what gavelkind is, and it's this. And Chat said, oops, I'm sorry. Oops, I'm sorry. Then it goes back in. It comes back and gives me a much better answer. And it had given me a lazy answer. It actually knew what I was talking about, but didn't give me a complete answer because it was lazy.
That's
just like a child.
How can the AI be?
And so,
Okay, we could sit here for a long, long, long time. You're going to amuse the audience and maybe make it cry or laugh or whatever, elicit some emotions. And
we'll try.
and so people can, I will put that underneath the video where they can send their lines, their poems to, and I'll ask some people for poems, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A as well, and then we'll have an open mic at the end of it, which may or may not be won by by AI. I would love to see some AI poetry, actually. Does it respond to poetry? Can you say, this is a poem, now write a response, AI, like a question, sort of call response, call response in blues or in, you know what I mean?
No.
Ask AI. You're
No,
a
I
bit
don't.
lazy. No, it's like, you've had these, they're more like soul songs, like a male song, and then the female singer came up with a kind of reply to that song.
Okay.
So, I mean,
you could do that with AI.
Yeah, there's this song called
You,
I think it's Muddy Waters, I am a man, and then there's a female blues singer called Coco Taylor, and she sings, I'm a woman making love to a crocodile, as opposed to, I'm a mannish man. Yeah. So you could ask AI to do something similar like that. It'd be really fun.
you can. That just
Okay.
gave me another idea. I could give it a poem and ask it to do a responsive poem.
Yeah.
In the same format, and it would.
And then we as the audience could vote which one was the original one and which was the real one. you know.
Yeah, we could.
Okay. I really look forward to your session on the 5th of July, and see you then. I'll stop the recording. Thank you.
Yeah.